I'm Rob Knopel. I'm the Dean of the College of Education here at the University of South Florida, and it's my very, very great joy to welcome you this evening to the first of the speaker series that we're launching. I want to tell you a little bit about the college and our goals and our mission. The mission of our college is to transform lives through the promotion of equity, social justice, and improved outcomes for students and communities, particularly those that have been underserved. The research that we conduct here, the degree programs that we offer, and the partnerships that we create are focused on solving some of the most complex problems of a diverse society, and on preparing practitioners to be agents of change. And I'm thrilled to welcome you here and to see so many practitioners in the audience tonight. So I thank you for making time out of your busy lives to be here. As I said, tonight we celebrate a new event here in the College of Education, one that we hope will enable us to achieve our mission to create and disseminate research that advances communities and conquers persistent problems of practice and advanced knowledge. The speaker series allows us to showcase some of the incredible research that happens here at our college, as well as our wonderful students. And I hope you have an opportunity to interact with them in the rotunda where they shared some of the research that they're doing as part of their program here at USF. It also allows us to be a resource to the community, and that's very important to us because in education, we all know that it's important to create research, but it really doesn't matter unless it trickles down and reaches into communities, that reaches into classrooms, that reaches into help families. So we're glad to be here tonight to do that service. The conversation tonight, as I said, will be the first in a series for our community and improved practice. Tonight's topic is timely. Over a year, just a little over a year ago, we all witnessed the tragic events that happened in Parkland. And I will tell you as a former school counselor, there's really no way to prepare for something like that. But we know that we need to be there for our families and we need to be there for our children and for our communities. So we decided that the first event tonight would focus on school-based mental health, a topic that we think is of great importance to our community, as evidenced by the great turnout that we have tonight. The format for tonight's event will include a brief presentation, and then a conversation that includes information from many different perspectives and that will broaden the topic for us. The event is moderated by our Associate Dean for Research and Faculty Affairs, Dr. Kathy Bradley-Clute, and I'm thrilled to introduce her to you and thank her personally for her service and being here to kick off this event. Again, we're thrilled that you're here. I welcome you to our college. Thank you for being part of a new tradition. I invite you to enjoy the presentation, and I'm really looking forward to an engaging dialogue. So thank you for coming. Dr. Bradley-Clute.
Welcome. We are so pleased that you're all here this evening as we engage in this very important and critical conversation of promoting social, emotional, and behavioral well-being in our schools. We strategically chose this topic tonight because there seems to be a great focus in the media on reacting to tragedy, reacting to violence, reacting to mental health concerns, and not as much attention, at least, on preventing and on focused interventions. We also strategically chose the title for tonight, and we made sure we included the word schools in here because we want to make sure that we're not just focusing on our students in our schools, we're focusing on all educators in our schools. We are so very, very fortunate tonight to have a keynote speaker and panelists who have a great deal of expertise in a variety of topics that we will be covering, including topics of promoting student happiness and well-being, developing positive classroom relationships, identifying mental health concerns, particularly around the area of early identification, and creating systems of support for student success. So to set the stage for this evening, I'm going to be introducing our panelists first, followed by an introduction of our keynote speaker. and our keynote speaker will share her presentation, and each panelist will then have an opportunity to react to the formal presentation. At that point, we're going to open up the evening for questions and discussion, so we invite all of you to participate with us this evening as well. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist that I'd like to introduce is Dr. Sarah Kiefer. Sarah. Dr. Kiefer is an associate professor of educational psychology at our College of Education here at the University of South Florida. She conducts school-based research to support motivation and peer relationships during adolescence, as well as to promote developmentally responsive teaching practices. Her goal is to serve as an advocate for supporting the development of today's youth through engaging in educational research, guiding prospective and current educators to strive for excellence in teaching, and collaborating with professionals on a local, national, and international level. So thank you, Dr. Kiefer, for being here with us tonight. Our next panelist that I'd like to introduce is Dr. Nathaniel von der Ems. Dr. von der Ems is an assistant professor of school psychology here in our College of Education. Dr. von der Ems serves as an associate editor for the Journal of School Psychology, and his research interests include universal screening for behavioral and mental health, teacher stress, and student test anxiety, and training educators in population-based mental health services. Dr. von der Ems received the 2018 Leitner-Whitmer Award for Early Career Scholarship from Division 16 of the American Psychological Association. Thank you, Dr. von der Ems. Our next panelist is Dr. Jose Castillo. Dr. Castillo is an associate professor, also in our school psychology program here in our College of Education, and he is director of the Institute of School Reform, also housed in our college. Prior to joining our school psychology program, Dr. Castillo worked as a program evaluator for the Florida Problem Solving and Response Intervention Project, and he worked as a school psychologist on assignment in Pasco County School District. His research and practice experiences center around facilitating and evaluating the implementation of a multi-tiered system of service delivery or service supports. It's also referred to as MTSS. You know how in education we love our acronyms, right? So there's another acronym for you. And his work has kind of particular focus on building educators' capacity to implement the practices that that comprise that model. He's delivered and evaluated training, technical assistance, and coaching efforts to implement MTSS in our schools, and has published several peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters on that topic area. So again, thank you, Dr. Castillo. Now I also have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker, Dr. Shannon Saldo. Dr. Saldo is a professor in the school psychology program in our College of Education here at USF. She received her doctorate in school psychology from the University of South Carolina in 2004. She is a licensed psychologist in the state of Florida and continues to provide school-based mental health services to youth in the Tampa Bay area. She has extensive research and clinical experiences in school-based mental health services, including establishing empirical links between student mental health and academic success, conceptualizing and measuring student mental health in a dual-factor model that considers psychopathology and well-being, evidence-based positive psychology interventions for promoting positive indicators of student well-being, and fostering student engagement and use of effective coping strategies by high school students in accelerated courses, particularly in AP and IB courses. Dr. Saldo has published more than 60 studies that convey findings from her research on how to assess and promote complete mental health. And I know she'll talk to you today about what complete mental health means. She is the author of Promoting Student Happiness, Positive Psychology Interventions in Schools, which is a 2016 book that was published within the Guilford Practical Interventions in School series. So at this point, I would like to turn the evening over to Dr. Saldo for her keynote presentation.
Thank you, Abby. It's lovely to see all of you all this evening, and I'm really honored and humbled that I was asked to spend about 25 minutes sharing with you some of our recent work on what we know about students' mental health. It's an intimidating task for me because the bulk of my work has been done in close collaboration with our local schools in Hillsborough, Pasco, and our municipal counties. And to be in the same room as so many practitioners and leaders in those districts is just really something that is a dream to feel quite frankly. It's been a wonderful last 20 years studying student happiness, and particularly 15 years doing it in Tampa, Florida. So my agenda for tonight is to talk about how we're currently defining student social, emotional, and behavioral health. So we have gotten a little bit away from the term mental health for a few reasons. Some of it is because there's reasons of stigma. Others is because it doesn't always real concretely get at what we're talking about, which is how students function socially, emotionally, and behaviorally. So what I'd like to share with you is a modern definition of what students' complete wellness looks like. Then I'll also talk about why is there a place for that in schools. So what about schools makes sense for promoting student social, emotional, and behavioral health. Then talk about a vision, if you will, for how to go about doing this in a way that's efficient, serves all students, and doesn't wait for the students who are most symptomatic to bubble up and need help. And then I'm going to turn it over to my panel, my distinguished colleagues, to talk about some of the work going on at USF that is research-based in these areas that we know are priority needs for students' mental health supports. So we'll talk about regulating student emotions, building healthy classrooms, and supporting educators' well-being, identifying students early, and then also how do we do this in a framework for providing a multi-tier system support for academic, emotional, and behavioral health. So in your inserts, you actually have some space, a card to write questions, but also suggestions for future talks, correct, Kathy? So if any of the things that I mentioned tonight you think, oh my gosh, you blew through that in like 15 seconds, then you can write down, maybe we'll have a whole talk on a topic of that area. But I wanted to tonight hopefully lay a framework, if you will, for a variety of topics that we believe make sense for what to do in schools to promote students' mental health proactively. So are schools the right place to promote students' well-being? Our panel certainly believes so. We're fortunate to be in college education that values students' academic learning and emotional learning. But I still get that question quite often from different stakeholders who say, our business though is to help students learn. Our outcomes are reading, writing, arithmetic, scores on SLSS tests, students' achievement, time in class, academic outcomes. Where does mental health fit into this? And for a long time, what development psychologists have known is that for a student to be functioning well at school, there are really two domains that interact. And when things aren't going well in one domain, they tend to affect the other domain in reciprocal ways. So we know that academic success is definitely the business of schools. And the way we know that somebody's successful is to look at how they're doing behaviorally, but also back it up and look at their motivation to engage. So we have outcomes of how students feel about their ability to achieve, their sense of belongingness to the school, and those types of psychological indicators promote those ultimate academic outcomes that our schools are ultimately, at the end of the day, assessed and judged by. But it's so closely linked to students' social emotional functioning that if that domain, if you will, is not addressed, then it poses barriers to learning. So we all have the same goal. And what this is schools need to be in is not just focusing on the actual academic content, but recognizing that kids do not exist in a vacuum. Instead, they show up to school with a certain level of willingness and readiness to learn that's affected by a whole host of things that we'll talk about tonight. So some of the outcomes that are really, really important here, we can see them. How well are students getting along with their peers? Do they have friends? What are the qualities of those relationships? But also, what is their current emotional status? What we'll talk about tonight are two different types of emotional statuses, distress and well-being. Talking about distress first, are schools the right place to serve students and support mental health? Well, unsupported, those mental health needs pose barriers to learning, so yes. And second, we currently in America have a very large unmet need in terms of student mental health supports. So what research has shown for decades now is that depending on the study, between 17 and 26% of youth at any given time would meet criteria for a mental health disorder. That's quite a large number. So large that a lot of people wonder, is that really accurate, or is that a fluke in your sampling? So about 10 years ago, Centers for Disease Control commissioned what is just a really well-designed study to look to see, if you take a random sample of kids throughout the country, enter their homes, and do a structured interview and assess them for every symptom of mental health problems, will you get those same numbers? And the results in a sample of 10,000 youth who were interviewed personally and their parents were interviewed was actually numbers are even higher. So the current state of mental health needs in America is that 1 in 5 kids is a low estimate. And instead what we see is that by the time the kids hit elementary school, about 15% of kids will meet criteria for anxiety disorder. So the red line is anxiety. And by the time they move into middle school, that number is about 25% of youth in our country today would meet criteria for anxiety disorder. And then by the time they enter high school, we're now about 30% of students meet criteria for anxiety disorder. And we also have ratcheted up numbers of mood disorders and substance use. A lot of people conceptualize substance use as self-medication for untreated mental health problems. So the current state of our society is we have this massive need for mental health services for kids to have full criteria met for mental health problems. So if you are fortunate enough to have those youth that don't meet that need, does that mean those kids are good to go? If you're not mentally ill, if you're not meeting criteria for anxiety, behavior disorders, mood disorders, or substance use, does that mean those children left over are happy? See them all shaking their heads? Okay, so for a long time, psychologists treated it that way. And psychologists looked to see if somebody met criteria for any of these forms of mental health problems. And if someone didn't, we counted ourselves lucky that they were not yet symptomatic and kind of sent them on their way. But more recently, think about the year 2000 actually, there's been a paradigm shift in psychology referred to as positive psychology to look at an outcome called subjective well-being. And that is really a fancy name for happiness. Scientists who study happiness who kind of mock that. Like, you study happiness, like, is that even a thing? So savvy researchers said, I don't study happiness, I study subjective well-being. So the real term is subjective well-being, really is a code term for happiness. So how scientists have studied happiness for quite some time now is by looking at a ratio of how you judge your life overall in comparison to how often you experience positive versus negative emotions. And scientifically, somebody said to have high happiness would say, overall, my life is going well, and on a daily basis, I experience more positive and negative feelings. That's what we're talking about when we talk about happiness. So you might be wondering, how do we study children's happiness? So in 1996, Scott Huebner at the University of South Carolina, and my current boss is from Clemson, so I try to say South Carolina too often, but it's been a slip up, sorry, it's twice now I've heard it, last 10 minutes. But what Scott Huebner developed was a measure of life satisfaction that is psychometrically sound for children to complete. And we've been using this measure of life satisfaction since the mid-90s. So what we ask now when we study children's well-being in a modern positive psychology approach is we ask kids to rate on a scale of 1 to 6 how often they agree with items like, my life is going well, my life is better than most kids, I have what I want in life, and then we throw in some reverse scored items too to make sure they're actually reading. So things like, I wish I had a different kind of life. So on a scale of 1 to 6, what do you think, ask my question first, which age range of youth do you suspect would have the highest average level of life satisfaction? And the lowest also? We'll start with the happiest. Which age group do you think is going to be the happiest on average? Here's some elementary shout-outs. That is where it lives. So little kids are fortunately typically very happy. So the average score on a scale of 1 to 6 for elementary school kids is about, what would you guess? 5. That's exactly right, it's a 5. So which group, which age range you suspect has the lowest life satisfaction? You would think middle. I would too. Yeah. So if you would think middle, what average score would you suspect for middle schoolers? Putting you on the spot. 3? So it's not quite that shareable. So this is our neutral point. If you're higher than 4, then you're saying, I agree, life's going okay. Even mildly agree. So middle schoolers are actually, it's 5, the second grade is above data. Second grade through 5th grade, 5, 5, 5, 5. 6th grade hits on average of 4.5. And that dip is pretty immediate. And it stays about a 4.5 through 8th grade, and then goes up to 9th grade. It drops again. Yeah. We see another hit, and the average life satisfaction score for high schoolers tends to be about a 4. That's average. So if you were a parent in your room and your high schooler is like, yeah, everything's okay, that's exactly average. That's okay. But if your younger kid says that, and we know something's not quite right. So we've been studying life satisfaction since the mid-90s when I was in the state of South Carolina. We included items of life satisfaction in our state's youth risk behavior surveillance system to track kids' well-being over time. Since I've been in Tampa, I've been very fortunate to work with a number of schools, so we have data, so it's pretty consistent no matter what neighborhood those schools are in, what year it's been, those levels are pretty solid. So it doesn't matter. We know how to measure kids' happiness. We know what's typical. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. Because what we know from several research studies that we've been doing for the past 15 years is that happier children and adolescents do better at school. Happiness co-occurs with better grades, better test scores, better attendance, better attitudes towards learning. There's also physical health benefits of happiness. In the adult literature, we know the happier you are, the longer you live actually. The happier you are, the likely you are to attract a marital partner. With youth, what we know is that happier kids have better physical health, they have better social relationships, they experience fewer social problems, they're bullied less often. They also are the perpetrator of bullying less often if they're happy, and they're less likely to develop mental health problems. So yes, happiness matters. But back to the question, is it the same thing as the absence of mental health problems? So what we have been researching in the positive psychology group for about the last 11 years now is what we refer to as the dual factor model of mental health. So psychologists for a long time have looked at just problems. Do you have social, emotional, behavior symptoms or not? So then we have this positive psychology approach of looking at happiness. Is it that there are only 2 groups of kids? You have problems or you don't? Or might there be 2 additional groups? Kids that don't have social, emotional, behavior problems, but also say, I'm not really happy with my life though. Maybe there are these students that are languishing in life. And could there be kids that have social, emotional, behavior problems, but they say, I'm actually happy with my life. Maybe I'm bothering others, but not bothering myself. Or maybe I have acclimated to my level of anxiety, it works for me. So that's 2 different groups of kids. So the vulnerable students are to be hypothesized would not cope with screeners' mental problems, but also are not happy with their lives. Symptomatic content children are also kind of off the diagonal. They might have symptoms, but they're happy with their lives. So in schools throughout the Bay Area for the last 15 years, we've gathered data on students' mental health defined as problems and wellness. And what we know is that all 4 groups definitely exist. It's not like we have just 2 groups of people. People that have problems, that are not happy, or people that are really doing well. So we have 4 groups. And if we didn't assess mental health comprehensively as both well-being and mental health problems, we would be misunderstanding 2 very important groups of students. So what we know is that in middle schools and high schools, about 60% of kids at any given time will meet criteria for complete mental health. Don't have symptoms of social emotional behavior problems and are at least mildly happy with their life. That is a good number. It's a promising number in my opinion. It's a cross section. Then we have about 15% of students that have the combination of mental health problems with low happiness. And these other 2 groups that you would miss completely if you didn't study mental health with this different model are the 12.5% of kids who are vulnerable and 11% of kids who are symptomatic by consent. So does this matter? It only matters if we see differences between these 2 groups and these 2 groups. We see differences between groups of kids who neither group has mental health problems, but these kids are unhappy. If these kids are doing better, then happiness matters, right? And then if we have kids with mental health problems, but one group is happier, and there's differences here, and happiness matters there too. So what we've seen in a series of published studies in Public College Review is that it definitely matters. If we look at GPA first as a middle school study, the highest grades were seen in kids that had the combination of high happiness and low mental health problems. And these are results that are significant after taking into effect the role of families, of economic resources, and of achievement in your prior. So even after you think of all those things that usually matter, that combination of high happiness and low mental health problems, it matters. When we did the study, we had the FCAT, and the next number was 3. And the kids that had the average score of 3 were the students that had complete mental health. And those students were doing better than their friends that did not have mental health problems, but also were not happy. Also see differences between students that have happiness or not, or low level happiness and attitudes towards schooling. If you want to see the best attendance, those days missed in a school year, the fewest days missed were among that subgroup of kids that had complete mental health, defined as no mental health problems in the presence of happiness. Those students were missing about half the number of days, and their peers who didn't maybe yet have mental health problems that were not happy. They also got along better with their parents, with their classmates, with their teachers, were more physically healthy, were left out of fewer activities at home due to health problems. I can show you many slides that show our database reasons for caring about happiness, because that combination is really vital. So what we know now through our research is that there are benefits of viewing mental health in a way that doesn't just stop at do you have symptoms of social emotional problems. That is definitely important, but and how happy are you with your life? There is some real value to feeling good. And that's really important, because if we don't understand that, then we're going to be offering incomplete mental health services. And I'll talk in a minute about what complete mental health services look like. So that body of literature has led states, policymakers to really think differently about what student mental health looks like. There's a few handouts in the far left of the room, and one of them comes out of Florida, where it's a 5-year SAMHSA grant awarded to the University of South Florida. It's a collaboration between Behavioral and Community Sciences and College of Education. And what we were able to put together to guide our state about 4 years ago is that the data shows that complete mental health in students is the combination of few symptoms of problems and many symptoms of well-being. And what that then kind of dictates logically is that our evidence-based supports need to do 2 things. We have things in place that prevent the problems. We need to address the risk factors for mental health problems, but it would be incomplete to stop there. We also need to have supports in place that promote the protective factors, the resiliency factors that lead to the positive indicators of well-being. So I'm going to focus on my remaining few minutes. Kathy mentioned earlier that there is a real knee-jerk reaction to, if I want to do mental health support in schools, I've got to start with the kids in crisis. And many schools have in place a well-developed plan for how to identify and assess those kids in crisis. But when we think about supporting all youth, we often have a triangle in mind of different layers of support. So yes, we need to find kids who need treatment, but rather than waiting for students to be that symptomatic, what can we do preventatively? And our framework, if you will, that we'll share with you, that we're operating from within our various programs, is being a little wiser and more efficient and more equitable, quite frankly, in how we're supporting students, and focusing on this foundation that we want to prevent kids needing treatment by preventing these risk factors, but also putting things in place that promote the positive factors. So we're going to talk about social emotional learning, positive psychology, and initiatives that treat school climate, facilitate school climate. Because what we know in best practice and resilience is that it's 2 things that matter in here. One thing is arming kids with skills to cope with adversities and to be successful at all times. But that's as far left. We want to help children have their own personal resiliency skills, but we also want to attend to the context. So it's a way of promoting a classroom climate and a school that in itself fosters well-being above and beyond what a child can do in that moment in the face of a stressor. So when we're thinking about those educational practices that make sense to prioritize, we're going to talk about and suggest prioritizing social emotional learning and positive cognitive interventions, because that gets at the emotion management students need to be resilient. But also thinking about what we can do to support educators' mental health, to promote that positive climate. Also strengthen class relationships, develop strong partnerships with our homes, and then increase our behavioral reinforcement systems that exist from the beginning. So if I was a school leader, I would think, that's a really tall order, right? Like I already have my hands full with picking out my academic curricula. Now, all of these things also matter. Like, can we just figure out a way to streamline this? So the colleagues and I on the Florida River Project that have been working with districts to put these practices in place have said there are some things that are just foundational. That if you're gonna figure out where to start prioritizing the social emotional supports, here's what we would suggest based on the literature. To help behavior, positive behavior supports make a lot of sense. To teach kids those resiliency skills, that's where social emotional learning, and then blending it with positive psychology makes a lot of sense. And then to promote that climate, that's where attending to teacher wellness and relationships makes a lot of sense. And that's just the beginning. So we also want to have in place a mechanism to identify kids for additional supports before it's too late. And that's where one of my colleagues have been able to talk about universal screening. So even though we're focusing here tonight, we want to acknowledge that we understand all of this occurs in the context of also having healthy families and healthy communities. So foundational also, focusing on school tonight just based on the topic. So I'm going to go a little bit about why these things make sense to talk about in schools. So social emotional learning, positive psychology, and then positive behavior supports. So why schools? I'm going to share with you some data from studies that have shown that these different initiatives work to not just promote students' mental health, but improve academic outcomes. So we're not just, it's wonderful to promote kids' mental health. When we do it in schools, we're also promoting their academic outcomes too. So it's a win-win, they go hand in hand. So when I mentioned social emotional learning, the goal of these programs is to teach kids skills in identifying their emotions, identifying them in others, managing emotions, helping other people work through their emotions so that we relate well together, and then also approaching problems with a problem-solving perspective. Those are the core competencies in the social emotional learning literature. There's a second handout also over there that has some resources, looks like this, that has some resources for parents and educators. And there's a link on that handout to CASEL. So it's linked to, it's mentioned down here, but also the direct link or direct instructions for on your handout. So how well do these programs work and how do they work? So what we know now from decades of studying social learning programs is they work as intended to improve kids' social competency. But even beyond that, they improve academic success. So I have just a few examples to share with you. Different types of social learning programs include things like Second Step, Mind Up, Ruler. So one evaluation of Ruler showed that the way it works is that they compared schools that were randomly assigned to social emotional learning or business as usual. The kids who were in the schools that had a social emotional learning program implemented by the teacher, where the kids who were a year later were observed to be in a context that had more positive teacher relationships, and in particular, more teacher support. And when kids were in that context of an emotionally supportive environment where it's comfortable to talk about emotions and work through your problems in a deliberate manner, those were the kids who, 1 year later, had better instructional, access to better instructional supports in class, and then also were the kids who got better grades, had fewer problems, and less learning problems. So this diagram is hopefully illustrating the way these programs work is teaching kids to not only be social emotional competent, but also, with their teachers, really creating that environment that fosters emotional wellness, which in turn facilitates all of our goals, just academic learning. Real recent study looked at thousands of kids who were fortunate to be in social emotional learning programs and tracked them going to school to see what was the key aspect of what changed to help these kids ultimately be better academically. And what the study found was that the level of social emotional competence that a student had by third grade was related to being more connected to school 1 year later, having fewer mental health problems 1 year later, and the kids who had the fewest mental health problems in turn were the students that had the greatest academic skills. So again, the goals are complementary. These programs that support students' mental health also serve to promote their academic well-being. Same thing happens when we look at outcomes with positive behavior supports. It's a way of helping students understand the behavioral expectations for a school and know what to expect if we violate those rules or comply with them. In schools that adopted PBS positive supports and did it with fidelity, so did it well, not just said, we're a school that cares about this. Those schools were the students that saw improvements in their classroom behavior, kids that they felt safer and like in a better learning environment when they were there, and then in turn were doing better academically. So I mentioned one third thing that I would put up there as a priority. The third thing I would say, just the social emotional learning and positive supports, is the newer one, which is positive ecology. That's the area I've studied for a while. And what we know from positive ecology is that a way of approaching happiness is not as a one-shot plan, but instead, whatever we can do to increase kids' positive emotions, help them feel more grateful at school, strive towards goals, give them a sense of hope and optimism, identifying these character strengths and strengthen relationships. So in recent work, we'll look to see when schools have taken this approach to promoting kids' happiness, that I established earlier is key to their mental health. And schools that have done that, have they seen differences in how kids learn and succeed academically? So some recent work overseas randomly assigned classes to teachers learning how to promote well-being, and in turn, teachers who subscribe to their children to schools that weren't randomly assigned to that. And what they found is that students that were in the classroom that were randomly assigned to have this positive ecology approach that facilitated these 6 goals were the students who 1 to 2 years later had increased happiness, which is the goal, but also had fewer mental health problems, better social relationships, and then 2 years later increased student engagement and higher GPAs. So there is a place for measures in schools, not just to promote students' mental health, but to get to our all shared goal, which is students' academic learning. So where that leaves us is, yes, it is a busy time to be in schools. There's lots of different targets that make sense, different programs and practices and interventions, but we need multiple of those program practices because they address different targets. So social emotional learning programs teach kids how to be emotionally competent, which reduces mental health problems, improves social behavior, improves academic outcomes. Our positive behavior supports help kids comply more with school rules and reduce behavior problems, which improves our school climate and leads to academic outcomes. And then our newer positive ecology interventions improve kids' happiness, which leads to improved social and academic outcomes. So we do need all these initiatives as foundational because they address different targets. So on our panel tonight, we have our different researchers who have developed expertise in areas that we hope have established as relevant to students' emotional well-being, but also academic learning. So we have in your handout, usually on the way out, some resources for you on how to promote students' happiness through positive ecology programs, how to build classroom relationships, how to support educators' well-being and identify students early who need extra support, and then Jose Castillo can speak to a framework for evidence-based practices and data-based decision-making. So in my remaining 3 minutes, a little bit about the first one, then I'll turn it over to my panelists to talk about their areas too. So it's hard to talk in a few minutes about what are some core practices to promote kids' happiness, but essentially what we know is that the way to make happier kids is to have 2 different targets. One is happier kids feel better about their past, present, and the future. And happier students also exist in classrooms that are characterized by strong relationships. So in the handout, there's a lot of resources for parents and teachers with websites where you can go to learn some of the activities that promote kids' happiness, but they're listed up here. And don't forget to shout it out, it's your resource list. So some of these things are things that we have worked with classroom teachers in Bay Areas to do all integrate into the classrooms and natural teaching moments. So things like helping kids keep gratitude journals, plan out acts of kindness, and then visualize their best possible selves in the past and the future. And the goal of these activities is to promote positive feelings. So at any given time, the choice of what to focus on. We can choose to focus on those things that are negative, aversive, and that really usually are most salient. Or we can purposely redirect our attention to instances of positive behavior when things were going well. Remember that happiness definition. Happy people say my life is going well and I am attuned to more positive, negative feelings. So these are different activities that promote positive feelings. There's some samples of work from the different schools in the Hillsborough area working for the past several years. This is a third grader's gratitude journal that we took a screenshot of. We asked the kids to keep a list of things they're thankful for each day. So this student said, I'm thankful that my mom's able to see me every day. I'm thankful that my dad is calm and fun. I'm thankful for my sister when she talks to me. That's really focusing on the positive, right? I'm thankful for my dog when he cuddles. And I'm thankful for my fish, hermit crab, because they're easy and meditative. So our assignment for this class again was today talking about gratitude. You have a lot of things to think about to choose how to focus on. We're asking you to choose things that went well in the past. Other activities that we do are things called like a gratitude visit. We ask people to think of people they haven't properly thanked, and then they have a list. Then they pick one person that could go out and deliver a gratitude letter to. So this is a young man, the fourth grader. He chose his mom. Dear Mom, thank you for always being there for me and taking me places I want to go. Thanks for feeding me and keeping me under a roof and getting the things that I need and loving me. Hugs and kisses, you're next up. So their assignment by this one, in addition to actually thinking about things that make them grateful in the letter, is to carry it out by delivering it and reading it in person to the recipient letter. Acts of kindness, what we know is that doing 5 acts of kindness in one day comes along with a boost of happiness. This is the middle school students' plan. And then we also know that visualization is a nice strategy. So we ask our students to purposely write about times that they're at their best now and to think about their best possible self in the future. So this is another elementary school child whose best possible self in the future was getting principal's honor roll. And here's her shade report card hanging on her parents' fridge. And then we ask them, once you can visualize that, what are the steps that you're going to take? Not that I'm telling you to take, what are the steps that you can take to make it happen? This is how the schooler said, well, the way I'm going to get my honor roll is to concentrate, try my best, try not to be absent, try not to be late, and get the most out of favorite cards. But she was really visualizing how she was going to make her goals come true. Those are the kinds of activities that we do with children to promote happiness. And not just us, we do a lot of our work in kind as our teachers. So we share with them the rationale for promoting children's well-being, give them some strategies, extra resources, and then they absolutely love it. Just put the train in motion. So this is our handout on complete mental health I mentioned earlier. I think is a nice snapshot of what it means to have complete mental, social, emotional, behavioral mental health. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Kiefer to chat about classrooms.
If I sit or stand? Are the mics on? Can you guys hear me? Okay, wonderful. That's a tall order to follow. I wanted to give you just a couple of big ideas around developing healthy relationships. And I just have a couple of take-home slides or take-home ideas, but I thought I'd sneak in a few slides while we're at it. And so I know school can be a really demanding place for a lot of students, teens, kids. They talk about school as being stressful, and that's not always a bad thing, right? And school can be challenging and they can grow from it, but we know that the challenging behaviors that we see in kids are more likely when the stressors and the demands that are put on kids, when they outstrip or they go beyond the capacities that kids have to respond in adaptive ways. So I want to share just 3 big ideas around ways that we can provide as foundation for kids in terms of meeting them where they're at, in terms of the demands that we have and supporting their needs, as well as helping them to increase their capacities to respond to those challenges and demands that they often face in school, and then kind of wrap up with a few ideas about how to promote those healthy relationships. So I think my first big idea is, it sounds really simple, but it's not. and it's how do we be developmentally responsive to kids. And I think meeting them where they're at and kind of being that kid whisperer can be really hard, right? But I think when we do that, we can help them to negotiate the demands and challenges in ways that are appropriate. And so thinking about developmental needs, I'm going to unpack that a little bit, but it also means how do we provide appropriate challenges for kids? And how do we get them to take on challenges that are appropriate too? That's like my hardest thing to do. I'm always taking on challenges and goals that are too big for me, right? Kids do this too. And how we can do that in ways that are empowering and equitable, I think are really important for us, just to kind of provide that foundation. So we know that for kids, they're motivated to perform their very best at school and be at their optimal when they feel like they're cared, when they feel like they're really engaged in the activities that are going on in school, and when they're held to those high expectations and they feel like they're a part of that community and they start to take on those values and beliefs of the school and the groups that they're in. So that's kind of my big takeaway point number one about providing a foundation to think about how do we be responsive to kids' needs. Three big needs that kids have, and this is great because we all have them, is a sense of autonomy. I love when I feeling like I'm in control, or even just the illusion of control is wonderful. Kids also like to feel like they're in control. We also like to feel like we're competent and we're good at something, that we're striving to get better at something that we care about and that matters. And lastly, we really like it when we feel like we belong. And these are three basic psychological needs. Self-determination theory talks about, there's a lot of great research, and it does matter, just like being happy matters. If your needs are met, we're in a happy place, right? That's when the server comes around at the restaurant and they say, you need anything? We say, no, I'm really in a happy place. All my needs are being met. But this is great because when your needs are being met, kids do better academically, socio-emotionally, behaviorally. We see this correlating with overall well-being for kids. But when we see this being not met, we see kids feeling like they're disaffected, right? Like they're really being passive. They may feel like they're dumb, they're stupid, they're incompetent, or they feel isolated, right? And they feel like they don't really belong or alienated. So these have really big implications, I think, for kids' success in school, as well as those healthy relationships. So there's lots of things that we can do, that educators, parents can do to support kids' needs. This really depends on where kids are at in terms of kind of meeting them developmentally where they're at. So I can give autonomy and choice, but I've got to do it in a way that matters to that kid. So it's going to look different for them in middle school, high school, elementary school, right? So there's a lot of different things. Providing that mutual respect is really important. Providing kids with relevant learning experiences, not just things that we think are relevant, but that they think are meaningful too. For competence, I think communicating those clear expectations and providing kids with some supports and monitoring and feedback can be really helpful. And then make sure that we balance that level of challenge and support so that kids don't get overwhelmed and they have enough capacity to respond in a way that makes sense for them. And I'm going to unpack maybe this a little bit more because I know that really matters for relationships. But thinking about the ways that we can get kids to connect in schools, in the different places that they're at, can be really, I think, important. When I hang out with middle schoolers, they talk about, I think, the scariest place in school. I don't know, do you guys know what the scariest place is in school? Try one more time. The lunchroom? Absolutely. I think that next to the gym is the scariest place, right? The classroom that the kids don't like are the classrooms that they don't have a friend in. So it kind of navigating those spaces can be really scary. It's like a social minefield for kids. So that relatedness can really make a big difference. So providing that foundation where we can meet kids where they're at and support their needs is key. The second piece for the foundation is helping them to increase their capacity to deal with demanding and challenging situations because they're not going away, right? School should be challenging. It should be demanding. So one thing that I think really piggybacks on Dr. Salvo's ideas around self-regulation, right, and all those other pieces is self-regulated learning. And this is great for not only learning, but behavioral and emotional and social components as well. So if you can help kids to kind of cut through distractions, which is hard today, with social media and our phones, and help them to set appropriate goals, to monitor how is that going, right, when you're on track versus when you're in the weeds, and then reflect and say, how did I do at the end of the day? This self-regulation is really important for kids and anybody to make really healthy decisions for themselves and for their families, and it can help them to be successful. It also provides a foundation to establish and maintain healthy relationships. So thinking about self-regulated learning and how we can kind of pull back that invisible veil can really help kids. So I loved and hated that chart that you showed with the kind of escalating mental health issues. Kids who experience mental health, who experience chronic stress, it can kind of erode on their ability to self-regulate. So the more supports we can provide and build in capacity, the better kids are going to be. So there's a lot of different things we can do for this. I think one of the biggest things is that for this self-regulated learning, focusing on self-control, being able to observe what's going on in terms of plan, do, and review. We don't really model this very much in our homes, communities, or schools. So thinking about ways that we can lift back that curtain and kind of show kids, how do we set reasonable goals that are not overwhelming, that I'm not going to fail at or just sail over without any problem? How do I readjust my plans when things aren't going well, right? This is things that we kind of do as high-functioning adults, maybe, but kids need help with this. And I think if we can provide that trust and rapport, that can help them to then try out these different strategies. So I think providing that space for practice and some scaffolding so that kids can get really good at making goals and revising them and adapting. That's going to help them be successful not just in school, but beyond when they're dealing with a lot of the messy problems that we have. So that's kind of building the foundation. And I think the last thing I wanted to talk about was the different ways that we can build those healthy relationships. I think there's kind of three big things that we want to look at: how we can directly support teacher and student relationships and peer relationships, and how we can indirectly support that positive peer climate and social norms in classrooms and schools. So in general, those high-quality relationships that we want to foster are usually characterized by high levels of trust, effective communication, and the willingness to provide academic and emotional supports. Whether you're a teacher or a peer, those are the big things that we're looking for. So in terms of that teacher-student relationship, there's a bunch of things that we can do. You probably already know what they are. A lot of it is demonstrating care and doing it in ways that kids recognize, right? I demonstrate care, but they're like, no, I don't see it. It doesn't really exist. So we'll have kids that will walk the entire span of a middle school to get a Band-Aid from the teacher because they know that she cares or he cares. So thinking about listening to kids, being able to kind of get to know them as a person, how they can be successful, can be really helpful. And there are a lot of other things that are up there, especially the kids who make such challenging behaviors, right? Those are the ones that need those supports the most, but they're the ones that are going to make us pull the hair out of our heads. So thinking about how do we kind of maintain those high quality relationships for kids that may kind of push our buttons, I think is really important. So providing that gentle discipline or inductive reasoning to kind of tell kids why things are appropriate or not appropriate, and be able to give the kids that need it the most those high quality teacher relationships is really key. In terms of peer relationships, there's a lot that teachers can do to support those trusting, supportive relationships. A lot of teachers, at least at the secondary level, don't always view this as being part of their job. So in middle school, about a third of the teachers think that it's important for them to foster healthy peer relationships. So a lot of this gets lost in translation and gets lost in practice. So thinking about implementing in a way that you can kind of help kids to treat each other with respect, the same things we want to be doing in those teacher-student relationships, we can promote in those peer relationships too. Middle school and high school, there's a lot of drama that goes on. Helping kids to deal with that can be really important. And lastly, thinking about the indirect influences by those teacher-student and peer-to-peer relationships, by providing that strong base of trust and support, you can help to develop that positive classroom and school climate that can be really important, and help to kind of garner some good kind of norms around effort and achievement. So there have been some great recent studies that are looking at in middle school and high school, which is kind of my focus, how we can shape kids' values and norms around academic effort at a time when it's too cool to, they don't want to be cool in school anymore. So thinking about how we can shift those norms away from increased salience of popularity, increased salience of aggression, to thinking about working hard and treating each other with respect is really important. Teachers can also be really attuned to the peer dynamics in terms of what do kids value, who are they hanging out with, and intentionally structure their classrooms to provide more supportive, healthy relationships as well. So that's just a little bit, probably too much, but I hope that wasn't too much information on building those healthy relationships.
So thanks, Sarah and Shannon, for really setting the stage for us. One of the things that Shannon mentioned in her talk really resonated with me in the sense that in schools we're dealing with something called 20-20 phenomenon. So that's whereas upwards of 20% of kids will exhibit a mental behavioral health problem, and yet we're only serving about 20% of those kids at risk. So how do we deal with that, really? First, I think when we're only addressing about 1/5 of those kids, at least tremendous delays in service. We know about 5 to 7 years on average in the delay of service. Now, I'm the parent of a 3 and a 7-year-old, and if we go to our pediatrician and say, hey, we need some help, the pediatrician says, well, come back in 5 to 7 years, we're looking for a different pediatrician. Now, you replace pediatrician in school, and you see the problem that we have here. And so one of the ways that we can do better, I think, in schools is to recognize that risk more broadly. And so when we're thinking about risk, now I can walk into any elementary school in Hillsborough, Pasco, Pinellas, and pick out the externalizers, right? We all know those kids. They're out of seat. They're talking out of turn. They're aggressive. But what about those kids that are in the back of the class? They're withdrawn. They're unmotivated. They've got their head down. That's a lot more difficult to recognize. And so as a school psychologist, we can go in and say to a teacher, can you please complete this long-form rating scale? I've yet to meet that teacher to say, 144 items on that rating scale, just not enough. A few more items is going to really unlock that kid. No, they're going to run me right out of that classroom. So what we need to do in schools, we need to do better, quick assessments to say, let's take the temperature before surgery is needed. Let's see what's going on with our kids. Let's take a really quick look into kind of like what's going on with them so we can triage those services, get them the help they need earlier before those long-term problems are going to be present.
I think you're done. Like Nate, I want to thank everybody for sharing their thoughts. A lot of the work that I do intersects with actually everybody up here, so I think for my comments, I'm going to take a little bit of more of a macro look at kind of the state of our schools and what we ask them to do and the people who have to do it. Just out of curiosity, because the older I get and the more I work with some of our students that are sitting over there, I realize some of the expressions and metaphors that I use that really resonated with me as a kid no longer make sense to anybody else. So do people still talk about the fact that it takes a village to raise a child? Yeah. Okay, everybody's familiar with that? Students over there? Okay, good. Not that dated. It can feel like a cliche, but I very much believe that. And I think over the years in our society, we've shifted a little bit to viewing schools as the village by themselves. You've heard a lot of things that I 110% believe in terms of the ways that we in schools can support the academic, behavioral, social emotional learning, happiness of our students. But it's a very, very big ask. And part of what we do is help figure out like how can we work with the educators in our schools to figure out how to meet that ask, for lack of a better way to put it. So you've heard some of our folks up here talk about the fact that we have to not think about serving students one by one by one. It's just not possible with the resources that we have. It's not possible when you think about, Nate talked about doctors and pediatricians. It's not possible to meet a lot of the medical needs that we have one by one. That's why we have public health approaches. And that's why Shannon talked so much about thinking about how do we put it into this multi-tiered system so we know what all kids should get, what some kids with similar needs should get, and what those individual students ought to get. We believe that one of the ways to help make sense of that and to figure out what that right combination is to have good data and information that helps individual schools and groups of schools figure out what their particular needs are, given their context. So you heard some examples of data sources today. Certainly there are academic, other behavioral indicators as well. And we believe that folks need a common language and a common way to look at those data in order to be able to make decisions about where to start with our student population and when and how to layer in those additional supports across the system. Again, what all kids get, what some kids get, and what a few get, in order to meet whatever the particular needs are in your context as a school. So the last thing I think I'm going to say in my comments anyway is that I also firmly believe that educators are people. And the reason that I'm making that statement explicitly is I do feel like because we ask so much of our schools that we don't always stop to realize that the stress that they're sometimes under, the challenges that they face, and the fact that they have to learn to be able to meet the changing needs of our students and our children and our families. And so I think we have to give them the space and time to make sense of these policies, mandates, challenges that are being faced, what we're asking them to do. We have to give them the space and time to do some professional learning, to spend time learning about the topics, learning about the needs, how to meet the needs at those different levels. To give them the permission to be reflective and to grow and to understand that we're asking some new things of you, as educators, and that means that it's not going to be perfect at first. It also means that we understand that not every need that we see is going to be met with 100% accuracy and what we would know to do 2, 3, 10 years down the road when we've learned and figured out how to do it. So I guess, to wrap up what I'm talking about here is I do believe the reason that schools have been asked to become that village is because it really typically is the one place where we have access to all our children and youth. And it's the one place that's built to teach, and you heard that from Shannon, you heard it from Sarah, you heard it from Nate, all of these skills that we need to be complete human beings in today's rapid, stressful society. And so if we do choose to accept that challenge, I think we have to recognize that it's a challenge and view it as really a professional learning community. Our schools have professional learning communities for a reason, and I think we need to support them in that learning and growth when we decide to take on some of the challenges and some of the charges that you heard my colleagues talk about today. So at that point, I'm going to go ahead and stop because I'm going to start right now.
So thank you to all of our speakers. Wow, a lot of information, a lot of wonderful ideas, a lot of great resources. We have about 15 minutes left for this evening, and we like to open this up for all of you to have a chance to ask questions that you might have. So if you do have a question, one of us is going to run over with a microphone so everybody can hear your question. You can ask it of any of the panelists.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Really appreciate it. First of all, thank you so much for the work you're doing and how timely this presentation is. I was a member of our board, superintendent at here in Hillsborough County. So it was thank you for the invite tonight because we're knee deep in this work, right? And I know you know our schools very well. You've been in our schools and you understand the challenges that we face. So this is something that just as a kind of a question and then maybe somewhat of a next step as we partner together in this workload because we all do this together. This has got to be hand in hand. I think about condition setting a lot because everything you talked about, positive well-being or happiness, whatever appropriate terminology is, the relationships, is really all about how we structure schooling in general, right? Because part of this is the challenge of we are still locked into a century-old system of how we do school, right? And a lot of that is dictated by the tail wagging the dog a little bit in how we literally think with the end in mind, kids being successful graduates, moving on post-secondary or workforce, and then what we have to do via the number of credits students take, to all the things leading back to grade levels in all the way back to kindergarten. And though that system that has been around for centuries, in my opinion, it does not necessarily, in this day and age where we have so many mental health challenges and issues that students are facing and the disconnectedness that they have with peers, and that we're setting them up almost for somewhat more stress by putting them in environments by which they have to when they're 14 years of age, and they're increasing their stress and all the other, the graphs that are going that way. We're also putting them in environments where every 45 minutes they're moving around, they're moving into other children, we're creating those kind of conditions that add more stress to their life, right? So I just think that one of the things I would like to see us talk more about is the conditions of schooling and how we better create environments by which, thinking about the 6 hours that children spend with us, how does that really need to look by which we can kind of mitigate some of the challenges that they're faced with, but also set the conditions so that their learning creates better relationships. Teachers are with them more than just 180 days. There used to be a day we partnered with the University of South Florida around multi-age classrooms. And so I taught at a school that had K2 and 3-5 environments. Guess what created the challenge for those schools to move away from that kind of environment? Testing. Because testing was very grade level specific. And it created that challenge where developmental learning occurs in a developmental way. Testing created us to completely break that model apart and now go back to our grade level approach. I say we don't have to do that, and I'm challenging our schools to think differently about that. But is there any research that you've looked at or anything that the college can help us with to bring back some of the condition setting for schooling that really best, because you're always going to have challenges that students bring to you. But if we can already have the schooling conditions set the right way so that relationships last longer, there's less disruptions during the day for students, they have stronger peer relationships where they see the same peers. I mean, we do this to the students in middle school. I'm telling you, we set them up for these challenges, and I'm trying to figure out ways to, in a system that still forces us to do very grade level specific types of assessments to determine whether our schools are successful. Can we also marry that with better condition setting in our schools? And if you could, perhaps if you don't have that research, if that's something we can really work and partner together on.
Let's take that.
So, thanks for being here again to start, because these kind of conversations are what we need to know what is the right type of research to do that informs schools, right? So, just a few thoughts, and I have some colleagues that are more fluent with systems level work than I am, but a few thoughts are, we know from working with our high school students that are taking so many advanced phase and IB classes, that come to the table with more stressors, but you have these options. So do we change the system and reduce the stressors? Or is it possible to arm kids with skills to cope? And is that the humane route? Like if we could just fix the source of the stress, right? Like why even have to teach them how to cope and be healthy and manage things well? So I think it was Sarah mentioned, not all stress is bad. And we actually have good research showing that in the face of developmentally appropriate stressors, that when children have the opportunity to, in the face of that stress, still succeed and thrive, then that builds so much competence for future activities. And we sometimes we get to the point actually we try to remove too many of the demands in a way that doesn't give them the opportunity to like flex their social emotional muscles in a way that allows them to build competence for future stressors when their environments are not going to be so kind. I'll just stop there with a small rationale for we do want to make it a kinder setting, but we also know that navigating an unkind setting is somewhat of an okay training ground for what life will likely hold for youth. And our research shows the students that have those skills are the students that navigate the exact same setting in a more successful manner.
I can speak just real briefly to school structures. So I focus at the middle level, transition in and out. School structures matter for kids, and they help to build those competencies, those relationships. Right now in Florida, less than a third of our middle schools are implementing school structures in terms of teaming. So we've got the same kids and the same teachers all day, and they're able to cover more than bases. So I work with a local middle school here. They had teaming. They lost it a couple years ago. I came back and they said, "So you guys aren't doing teaming?" They said, "Oh yes, we are. Each grade is a team." I said, "You have 350 kids. That's not a team." But when you have those advisories, when you have kids are in the homeroom, they're working together, that can make a big difference. So I think structures can matter. We've got some really good work going on here in the college, looking at structured and unstructured spaces at the middle and high school level, and how middle schools and high schools are kind of handshaking on that. And what we're finding is those unstructured spaces are the places where relationships and the competencies matter the most. And so I think kind of honing in on some of those spaces that we don't really look at, like the cafeterias, the hallways, before and after classes can make a really big difference for kids. But those school structures can also help, I guess, give us that stronger foundation to not just do one-on-one each for kids as well.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about setting conditions, we're talking about the people that are living those conditions, particularly our educators. So we recently just completed a study with the first-year teachers in Tampa and LA Unified, Los Angeles Unified School District. And what we looked at is the stress, the commitment to the school, and the efficacy 3 times a day, every day for 4 weeks. And what we've consistently found when we're looking at their instructional practices is the negative relationship between high stress and the quality of instruction. So if we're talking about asking our teachers to do more, especially our first-year teachers, how are we supporting them, giving them skills? And we do this better at the pre-service level, at the undergraduate level when we're training our teachers. Are we equipping them with the skills that we need, that we're putting on them in this 21st century environment, particularly around social emotional skills? So I think there's a lot we can do better on, and I think that's an area that we're certainly working on.
Yeah, I mean, just really quickly. So I agree with your statement about the tail wagging the dog, and I think that many policies have pros and cons. It's not one or the other. And I do wrestle with myself when we start to talk about the state or level structures, for example, that make it easier to organize by grade levels in order to submit data and things like that, or the policies around accountability in terms of having to have certain percentage of students who are efficient, and the tension when we start talking about this topic that creates when we're saying, look, we know that there are ways to address some of these social, emotional, behavioral happiness issues. And by the way, I think we might be creating some of those, which is some of what I heard in your question, some of what we're doing. And so I'm not familiar with research about like the different ways to structure things. What I do believe that part of the sense making that we have to do with our schools and districts and really with our state level folks is, you know, what are we getting and giving with the way that we're handling this? And if we are willing to think about this a little bit differently, are there creative ways for us to handle, you know, some of that entry, you know, for data? Are we going to see some of the improved outcomes that Shannon and others talked about when we take the time to do these things, even though the closer we get to what has been moved recently, I think it's more the end of April now, that FSA, the harder it is for us to rationalize that we should be taking the time to focus on the complete, you know, well-being and mental health of our students, because that matters for the academic outcomes, but so does the content. So there's those type of things. So I unfortunately, I know it's not like here's the silver bullet, but I think that those conversations have to happen, and we have to be willing as a society to advocate for what we think is going to be needed with the folks who make those decisions in Tallahassee and in other places.
So what we're doing right now at our school, which is King High School here in Tampa, what we're doing is we have a mentor program, and we've taken some random students, not just, I won't say random, but we selected a select group of our students. And what we are doing is we're speaking and we're spending time with the students each day, meeting with them twice a week, sometimes going to their different activities. Whatever that student needs that we are capable of doing, and with the confounds of the school, these are some of the things that we're actually doing at our school. So I thought that would be a great stress reliever for some of the students across the district if we could share that.
Do any of our panelists have any follow-up?
And I think your question about bullying, social media, you know, certainly we're entering into a digital age where kids interact very differently. And so as schools, we have to adjust, whereas some of those skills might be learned more naturally in the past with social interactions. Sometimes we have to explicitly teach those skills and teach how kids can interact and cope with their various emotions and the stressors of childhood. And so I think we're asking more and more of our educators, but that's a challenge that I think we're up to take on.
Interventions we've been developing to teach our high school students social emotional skills. We've been very fortunate to partner with the kids themselves and say, here's what we think are good ideas, and more accolades to my graduate students think are great ideas. And then we ask the students, what are we missing as a high school? What are we missing here? How do you want to learn? So we take the topic of teachers and relationships. We had some great things we thought to cover, how to approach a teacher, how to ask her, and her do questions. And our kids said, but how do I send an email that they're going to reply to? Because my teachers tell me, like, your email was so rude. And all I said was, like, what's the assignment? So we had to give them, like, examples and non-examples of email etiquette. What I had to say is not something that popped into my head, or what's the best way to address someone. And then we got to peer relationships. It was very simple. As we talked about how do you handle somebody gossiping about me in the hallway, but how do we handle appropriately somebody posting on Facebook, calling me a bad name and making snarky comments about me? So when we work with the students to develop the content, to give them an opportunity to problem solve and learn these skills, it's really wise to listen to them about the kind of things they face. And what they bring up is very electronic and different than the kind of things we faced 10 years ago.
I think being in a more proactive place can be helpful, because I think schools are a little reactive to what's going on with social media. But I think you're absolutely right in terms of making sure there's at least one adult advocate that kids get to interact with in a consistent manner in school or outside the community. That can help them to get those skills to deal with the social media and in a much more effective way.
Okay, I think lesson learned, we could have made this longer, right? We could have used more time, so for the next time. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, for engaging in this very critical discussion around social and emotional well-being in schools and how to promote that and how to prevent some of the current concerns that we see in our society today. I think the questions and discussions have been wonderful, and I think, particularly ideas of future research studies and certainly partnerships with our school districts around these critical areas and opportunities and options for ways that we might look at doing schooling a little bit differently to make sure that our students are successful. So I want to, let's give our speakers, our keynote speaker and our panelists another round of applause. A couple of things before you leave. There's a 3x5 card that was in your materials at your seat, and there should be a pen there. We're asking you to please give us some suggestions for future speaker series. This is the first one. So we would love to hear from you. Do you want to go more in depth on the topics that we had tonight? Are there other areas that would be helpful for you in terms of your schools and your education? So please take a minute or two and write down some topics that you would like to have us focus on for our future series. And there's a basket. Shira's holding the basket up. There's a basket over on the side there where you can place your card on your way out. And then Shannon was reminding me that there's some handout materials on the table over there. So please take those as well. And I would like to thank Tracy Nars, Elizabeth Engasser, Yashira for all your work in setting this up today. The room looks great. And so, again, a lot of folks behind the scene who helped us put all this together. So again, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.